I always thought it was a bit silly that so many franchises got lazy with their naming during the Nintendo 64-bit era and went with Title 64. But I gotta say, I actually played a lot of these games, especially through rentals, so there must have been something enticing about having that 64 in the title. Today, I will play all of the Nintendo 64 games with the 64 in the title. Let's get Nintendo games out of the way. I don't think anyone needs me to tell them that Mario 64 is a great game. Considering its age, Mario still controls pretty fluidly even though the camera angles are not that great in some situations. I honestly blame Mario 64 for making it look so easy to transition from 2D to 3D. It's probably responsible for motivating so many terrible early 3D games. This was a launch title for the N64 as well. Good stuff. The only other launch title for the N64 was Pilotwings. Is Pilotwings more than a tech demo? I would say so. I especially love the death scene. Good stuff. It's a simple game for sure, but it is a fun experience with some great music and characters. Holy, look at her rockets. Starfox 64. Can animals without opposable thumbs fly a spaceship? Apparently so. This was my first experience with the vibrating controller. You wanna feel the vibe? My father told me it would be a life-changing experience. It was not. This is probably my favorite Nintendo 64 game. I can't move! Mario Kart 64 is not the best Mario Kart game, but it's definitely the Mario Kart I played the most. I don't think it's even the best racing game on the console. It's definitely showing its age, but it's still pretty fun. Speaking of racing games, Wave Race 64 almost made me want to play out in the sun. Water racing games are rare even to this day. I wish they at least released a version on the 3DS or something. The series is only 3 games deep, with the last game coming out in 2001. When I played as a kid, I thought the water looked amazing, and they still kinda do. Dr. Mario is a fun puzzle game, and Dr. Mario 64 is more of the same, but is this game deserving of that 64 in the title? Is this even 64-bit? Whatever that means. Still fun to play, and I personally think Dr. Mario is more fun to play than Tetris. This game probably has the best music out of all games in this list. Donkey Kong 64 is the only Donkey Kong game in 3D. It's probably the worst Donkey Kong game, not because it's bad, but because all the other mainline Donkey Kong games are amazing. I had a lot of fun playing it as a kid, but it's not a game I think of fondly for some reason. The DK rap on its own is worth playing the game. Wait, but I heard that people don't actually like this song? Does this count as a Nintendo game? It was published by Nintendo but made by Rare. Also published by Nintendo, Kirby 64. Unlike many of the other game franchises at the time, this game did not try to go full 3D. Kirby decided to only get its toes wet with 2.5D. This actually was way better than those awful 3D games. It's pretty cool to suck people up and take their souls and abilities. Excitebike was pretty fun on the NES, but how is it with the additional power of 64? It's alright. I like the NES game far more than the N64 one, but the good thing is that you can unlock the NES version in the N64 game. The controls are not great, but it's overall a decent playable game. If we're going to talk about Nintendo published games, I guess I have to include Starcraft 64. This was a Nintendo published game, apparently. Do you love Starcraft? I'm a Korean bear, so I have to love Starcraft by default. It's in my DNA. It's amazing that they even got this game on a console and N64 at that. It's obviously a very different experience. The lovable N64 controllers isn't meant for those fast RTS gameplay. I actually enjoy this more slower paced single player experience that it brings. And once again, it was Starcraft on the console. That was some amazing stuff at the time.
Oh yeah, sounds fun, sounds fun, sounds fun.
Speaking of surprising Nintendo published game, Ridge Racer 64 was published and developed by Nintendo. This might still be my favorite racing game that doesn't involve plumbers and monkeys. You know, I feel like there's a lot of racing games on the N64 that had a 64 in the title. Why is that? 11 out of 37 games are racing games. Micro Machine 64 is a pretty fun racing game though. I never liked this series when I was younger because I could never get used to the top view in a racing game with tank controls. But once I got used to that, it was an enjoyable experience. I always enjoyed the racetracks in these games, which are just normal everyday life places. I would definitely not make any eye contact with this guy. Wipeout 64 was one of the better racing games on the systems, I'd say. Racing in this game just feels so fast. It is so fast that you can see the map pop in as you drive by.
Go.
I find this game pretty hard. I think the game is too fast for an old bear. For a much slower experience, you can play Monster Truck Madness 64. I never said it would be a good game though. I played the PC game from the franchise before and it was alright, but the N64 version just doesn't play right. The cars are slow and weirdly floaty. It's overall very difficult to control. But it's a Rockstar game. Humble beginnings, I guess. You know what else was alright on PC but absolutely awful on the Nintendo 64? Carmageddon 64. This game series is notorious because its whole thing was that you can run over people in the game. There's obviously none of that in the Nintendo 64 version, but whether you like it or not, that was the whole point of that game. What's left is a terrible racing game with no identity. I've heard that many people consider this game to be one of the worst games on the Nintendo 64. Keeping on with the violence theme, have you ever wanted to smack people as you drive by? Well, you can in Road Rash. There's a lot of games in this series, but is it better because it's 64 bits? It's alright. I like how the cop tells you to put your hands up while you're driving a motorcycle.
Put your hands up!
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll die if I do that. Oh, that guy's dead for sure. I don't know if this counts as a racing game, but it has cars in it. Unlike other racing games, the goal in Destruction Derby 64 is to destroy other cars. I guess the name basically implies what the game is about. You can destroy cars in a racetrack or in a bowl. It's some brainless fun that would be pretty fun to play with friends, which is what Nintendo 64 was all about. The last racing game for N64 games with 64 in their names is Stunt Driver 64. If you know about this game, you're probably a video game collector. This is one of those rare games due to it being a Blockbuster exclusive game, which makes it expensive. Is this game worth it? No, not at the crazy expensive price. It's got anti-gravity racing, so it's basically Mario Kart 8, so that's pretty cool. For a surprisingly large amount of racing games with 64 in their name, there isn't too many sports games that ends with the 64. For American football on the N64, there's Madden 64. I don't have much to say about it. It's a football game and it's pretty fun.
Touchdown!
There are 3 football/soccer games. FIFA 64, Hamm Soccer 64, and International Superstar Soccer 64. I think International Superstar Soccer 64 is the best one out of the bunch. It has more of an arcade feel than the other games.
He goes in hard. What a cracker!
That's not very nice. The other 2 games though feel sluggish and definitely didn't age very well. Well, I doubt Hamm Soccer 64 was ever any good, even before it aged. Does pool and chess count as sports? In Virtual Pool 64, you can play many types of games under different rules. I'm not super into these games, but I think someone who enjoys pool can enjoy the game. I do love me some chess though. Chess is something that I would love to get good at someday. Virtual Chess 64 is a chess game with fun animation when a piece gets taken. That's basically the only thing that this game's got going on. Is this game even 64 bits? Anyways though, chess is always fun. You know what don't belong on the N64? First-person shooters. I understand that GoldenEye was good and all, but I could never really get used to playing shooters on the system. There are only 2 FPS games with 64 in their name. Doom 64 and Duke Nukem 64. They are both pretty well liked games. I found Doom more fun and easier to play than Duke Nukem. Doom 64 isn't a bad port of Doom 1 or 2, it is its own game. Duke Nukem controls are so weird. But hey, I understand the N64 controller was a monstrosity. I never was a fan of that controller, probably my least favorite controller of all time. Another first-person view game but not a first-person shooter, Shadowgate 64. The controls once again aren't great, but it makes less of an impact here because it's such a slow atmospheric game. The game begins with you being captured and imprisoned at Shadowgate. It's a pretty challenging puzzle game that is worth a play. Now, time for my favorite genre of games, RPGs. I think N64 was definitely not known for its RPGs, but there are some RPGs with 64 in their names. Ogre Battle 64 is an amazing game. The battle system is definitely unique, so it takes some time to get used to, and it won't be for everyone. If it clicks for you, there is so much depth and content. I will probably revisit this game in the future to really sit down and play it. Harvest Moon 64 is my kind of game. I enjoy games with a little to no stress. I enjoy Harvest Moon series more than Animal Crossing series. Just like other games in the franchise, you grow crops, take care of animals, and do all sort of chores until you get married. Everyone likes a homeowner. Real exciting stuff. Quest 64 is definitely a game I remember. I rented it because the box looked really cool. I was very disappointed in the game because I wanted to like the game. There were so many elements I liked, but ultimately it was just not that fun to play. It's an RPG that is very bare bones. Some people online thinks this game is good. There are not too many RPGs on the system, but there's plenty better games than Quest 64. I guess rest of the games with 64 in the title are action games. Who wanted a 3D Bomberman game with a fleshed out single player? Not exactly my cup of tea. Doesn't feel like a Bomberman game to me. There's so many more fun Bomberman games out there, new or old. This game even has a sequel on the platform, Bomberman 64: The Second Attack. The second game is pretty similar to the first one, but it feels more like a Bomberman game. The second game is pretty expensive though. I think even back during N64 days, beat 'em up games were already going out of style. I think a lot of developers struggled to do beat 'em up games in the early 3D days. Fighting Force 64 is pretty fun even though it can feel pretty slow at times. You beat up some boys in suits to big boys in suits to girls in swimsuits. I love how you can shoot people in the face. I learned recently that this game was going to be Streets of Rage 4 until they changed their mind. Gex 64 is kinda like Mario 64 but on drugs, and with terrible controls and camera angles. I definitely enjoyed this game when I was a kid, but I'm sure that was on the PlayStation 1. Graphics and sound is downgraded on the N64, no cutscenes and less exclusive levels. So yeah, play the PS1 version if you can, unless you only have a Nintendo 64 or something. Remember when Megaman went full 3D? I think Megaman 64, a port of Megaman Legends, is an alright game as long as you don't consider it to be a Megaman game. I think there's a pretty good reason why they don't make 3D Megaman games anymore. The controls are pretty unusual, but it's not too bad once you get used to it. What I can't get used to is Megaman's goddamn voice. It's so bad.
Megaman, check the map! There's an island called Cadillac about 100 miles southwest.
I remember seeing this game on the shelf when I was renting games before. It never interested me, but the cover doesn't do the game any justice, you know? But I think this game is pretty fun. I think this is one of the best games with the 64 in the title. Robotron 64 is basically a top-down twin-stick shooter. It's quick and chaotic. For a different type of shooter, there is Nuclear Strike 64. It's a top-down helicopter shooter game, which is kinda unique I guess. I like how you play in a big map and there's multiple objectives that is somewhat varied. Okay, last game. Tetris 64, a Japan exclusive Tetris for some reason. Are they keeping all the good stuff from us, or are they protecting us from garbage? I mean, it's Tetris, you know what you're getting into. I don't think it's a great Tetris game though. I think this game should not be allowed to have that 64 in the title. Is this even 64 bits? The background, the music, and the blocks all look and feel so bland. I always wondered how many N64 games had a 64 in the title. Apparently there's 37, less than I thought. Did I miss any?